Hey there, I am Danielle Zapchenk, and I appreciate you joining me today on the Parable Podcast. Today, you're going to meet my friend, Connie Lemois. She shares about how she moved out of a secondhand faith into something more.
My belief in God was really at risk here because I have other family members that are complete non-believers or even could say atheists. I feel humiliated that I'm putting all this weight even on my mom's faith that maybe her life didn't line up exactly. So it took a lot of meeting with people, replaying parts of my life to try to bring reality into perspective.
Here's my conversation with Connie Lemois. Oh, but Connie, I met her over a year ago. We worked together with Women's Speaker Collective, and I got to meet you, Connie, for the first time this summer, live and in person. I was so grateful to meet you, and I'm so thankful that you joined me today.
Thanks, Danielle. I'm super honored. And let me tell you, the first time I met you was the first time I ever got a welcoming like that. Your entire family. I remember finishing up a phone call, like my husband checking in. Your entire family came out to welcome me and give me a hug. And I think there were tears. And I was like, this is beautiful. I've never had this before. Anyway, that's just a picture of who you are, and I loved meeting you in person. It was an amazing experience.
Thank you. Well, if anyone's wondering, I mean, the tears were me. Okay, it wasn't her son. So that's funny because it's just that's just totally normal to go outside and welcome somebody in our driveway. But thank you. It was really fun. And we got to hang out with your son. You guys were in town for a conference. And so it was just really special. My favorite, I feel like my love language is to welcome people in and let me feed you. So I hope you felt well fed and loved that night.
I did. Yes, it was super peaceful and it was a homemade meal. It was awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, some of my questions that I was thinking of is, what is something that maybe not everyone feels this way, but it really brings you a lot of joy?
Something that brings me a lot of joy, I would say, in this season is alone time.
Okay.
I feel like I'm naturally actually an extrovert. So this is new for me, but in this season, I really just love, I think we've been go, go, go for so many years and with kids that I really just love having some alone time to read or to binge watch Netflix. That's it.
What style of book do you like? Is there a certain genre that you like?
I love leadership books. Anything theological. I'm not a big fantasy person, although I have given a couple of them a try, and I do like that.
That's good. I think, it changes how I'm feeling. I like to kind of go by season. Also, for you, what would you say was the last time you felt like you were in the right place? But sometimes, we kind of just feel what you said, I'm going. But you're like, okay, I know I was meant to be here. It was a divine intervention. Or you're just I was right in front of Netflix when I needed to be.
I think when my family and we had a move from Pennsylvania to here, I think it was the first time I felt this is where we're supposed to be, but this is not where I thought I would be. We were pastoring at a church in Massachusetts and we moved to Lancaster, and there were options for us to move other places, and we kind of picked here and we were excited about it, but it was also not where we thought we would be even just geographically. But at the same time, there's peace of how God is working in us and through us in this time and spot. So
Connie, what would you say, what does your day-to-day look like? I know that you are in the medical field. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
So I am a nurse manager. I have about 70 employees under me now. And before that, I had an ICU background and was at the bedside in, different hospitals. So a day-to-day right now, I'm a little more removed from patient care, and I kind of tell people I'm more caring for the nurses and the systemness part of caring for patients. So I'm usually an early riser and going to the hospital and caring for patients before and after surgery is what we do. So a lot of putting out of fires, collaborating with anesthesia and surgeons. So I love it. It's fun.
Why the medical field? Of all the things you could have chose, why that?
I didn't have a moment where I was this is my passion. I actually don't think I was yes, this is what I want to do. It was kind of birthed a little bit out of survival because I knew it would be a job that would provide for me because I was a young mom. And then I had been a nurse aide for a while, so it was kind of like a natural thing. I actually felt like I wouldn't be good in the medical field because I had this stigma about being good in math. I felt like you had to be like some mathematician in high school. That's kind of what I thought. So it was kind of a gradual change. My first initial major had been in a criminal justice field. So I kind of switched. So yeah.
That's interesting because there's like probably plenty of jobs that I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that because of math. All right. Yeah. But it really was the teacher. I realized that later. It's the teacher that my last math teacher I had in college, because I had to only take one credit. That's all I had to do. Yeah. He was so fantastic. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I actually do understand math. It is the person. Right. Who would you say, do you remember any of your teachers like from elementary through now that you're like, oh, that woman or man was like, it really like shifted my idea of learning?
I think the teacher, I don't know. I just felt very welcomed by her. I'm not sure. And yeah, she gave me confidence, but I do remember she was an ex-nun. Yeah. And I was very kind of a little more all over the place and always about having a good time. And yeah, she really shifted my perspective on even public speaking now that you're talking about it. Like I remember having to do like talks in front of her and, I kind of cheated a little too much than what the requirements were by like keep reading, but she never said anything. She'd always just encourage me and just encourage us to have a good time. So, and she'd tell me the funny stories about being a nun. Like she shared with me how she'd sneak razors in to shave her legs because they weren't supposed to shave their legs. And so she just was just like this very real person and very funny. And
I love that.
Learned to love learning with her in her class. Yeah.
That is something. Do all nuns are not allowed to shave their legs?
I don't know. We should have somebody write in and tell us.
Please, if somebody knows, just like, let me get on Google this moment. It is just very interesting to me. Yeah. Well, Connie, you said that you enjoy the medical field, but like you have passions in other areas. So what would you say like gets your heart beating the most?
I think if I had to nail it down to a couple things, I think it would be the health of systems or organizations, including the church. Like I am very in tune to that, kind of the why behind the things that we do or how we help people meet Jesus. I would say women in leadership is a big thing for me, which also for me kind of fits under that healthy system of like men and women being able to lead together. Yeah. And the other part would be people, I guess I'm very passionate about people understanding the Bible for themselves and kind of being able to understand the meta narrative of the story and how their story fits into it and being able to utilize the Bible to help them navigate things that they might go through in life and not always, having like that secondhand faith. So I really love helping people meet Jesus in that way.
Where do you think like that passion of the health of systems, like understanding the why and women in leadership, like how do you think that was kind of built through you? Now, obviously, naturally, God can just like give us that intuition, but I'd be curious, like if you can see like, oh, it was because of this specific thing that happened in my life.
Yeah, I think that ties into kind of like the whole parable story is like the way I was brought up. There was a lot of, for me, like the family system was a system that was kind of broken. And then when I started kind of leaning into the church world, there was some systemness things there where I had opportunities to help build or work on, but I could see kind of the brokenness there. Yeah. And I think it just ended up slowly just changing my heart to want to be able to make healthier systems for people to learn in, because I think I was so affected by, I guess really back then would be the first system you encounter, which is your family system. So
wow, I love that. Okay. So I know that's going to tie in. So Connie, if you could just kind of give us the lay of the land, what is your parable story for us today?
Yeah. So I think the parable story I'm going to talk about is really about how I was brought up. And so I'll just start at the beginning, like, many stories do. So I was probably the first 5 years of my life, I have like this very happy childhood memories. I had a very bubbly mom who was always talking about how much Jesus loved you and all the plans Jesus has for you. And she kind of always had people in our home that were on the fringes. And I always remember worship music playing in the background continuously. And I had a very hardworking dad and have a lot of memories of wrestling with him. And I have two siblings, a brother and a sister, and just yeah, just like this normal little family, really. So I remember accepting Jesus at a young age. And I still remember like doing it every night. And my mom saying, no, you don't have to keep doing that. And I was like, well, okay, I'll stop doing that. But then I kept, well, if you give me a horse and it's outside the window, then I'll really believe, I started doing the manipulative childlike things. But I had a very charismatic, like, faith foundation. I think there was a lot of talk of healing, strongholds, but probably not a lot of that biblical. Like, I probably couldn't have talked to you about the gospel or really like laid that out, or some stories in the Bible, like I kind of knew of, but didn't really understand how they fit. Right. So fast forward, when I was about 5, I had learned that the dad who was raising me, because my last name was kind of the same as everybody in my family, but I actually learned that he was my stepdad. And I had a birth dad who wanted to start formally seeing me. So around that time, I started to go visit him and kind of learn about his side of the family. And at that time, I don't really have much memory of like how it affected me. I remember my last name like being a weird thing, that it was changing, because then my last name had to change. So that was, I remember that, but I don't remember anything too much more abrupt than that. And my brother had always had these like pretty bad behavioral issues that were always being managed. So there was a little bit of chaos bubbling up in that time. And then fast forward, when I was about in 8th grade, my mom and my stepdad, the dad who raised me, ended up getting divorced. And both my dads throughout my relationship with them had alcohol addictions. I wasn't around it all the time, but it would kind of flare up sometimes. So then after that, again, my mom still has like Christian music, worship music in the background. So we're still talking about Jesus, but I'm not really plugged in anywhere, and my family's not really plugged in anywhere, but there's still a lot of conversations about Jesus, or still having people over that are on the fringes and stuff like that. So about that time, my mom had a woman move in who lived upstairs, and she also happened to be a lesbian. So at this time, this kind of was like very aligned with how my mom always was helping people. I even remember at a young age having teenage moms kind of live with us for a little bit and then get on their way. So she moved in to kind of help with the bills and kind of like rent the upstairs. As I started going into my senior year, I was very involved in school. My brother was still having behavioral problems. He was in and out of like boot camps, and my sister and I were kind of doing our thing in school and doing, I would say, quote unquote, normal teenage things, which means in my upbringing meant it was very normal if I went out to a party, got in a little trouble, but also was still like a pretty good kid, at school. Still had some Christian friends, and they were kind of intermittently in and out of my life. And I became this professional chameleon all of high school. So on the weekends, I would, like I said, have a little bit of fun, and I just had friends in all different kind of realms. So then about my senior year, I had a boyfriend, and soon after I graduated, I did get pregnant. So I was 18 at the time. And my family was we had multiple systems of family, but most of them were pretty supportive. And I ended up staying with my mom and living there for a little bit. Boyfriend moved in, and then we moved out together. And kind of were living this very, I would say, normal family life from my view. Like, there was a lot of things we were trying to navigate that we didn't have the emotional maturity to navigate all the normal relational things, but also we didn't understand the forces of our background that were kind of playing into our life. So at that time, I had been in nursing school, and I still remember going through nursing school with my little baby. Like, I had him, and I didn't take any time off and just continued through. And it really, where the story kind of converges here, you would think it was when I got pregnant, I guess, but we had a very big fight. I came home one night, and we have had fights before, but it never really got physical. It was more, verbal, emotional type fights. So I came home, he had a friend over. I couldn't even tell you how the fight started. I am sure it was over something very stupid, as many of our fights were, with lots of deep roots, and it ended up getting extremely violent, I would say. There was a knife pulled on me and the friend. I remember my boyfriend at the time, the father of my son, kind of talking in a third person. I don't know if he had any substances in him at the time. I'm not really sure. And I remember him holding us on the couch with the knife, and me and my friend were just sitting there, and he did hit me across the face. And I remember his friend just putting his hand on my leg. And I just kind of remember thinking, I need to get out of here. He ended up going out on my porch. I was able to lock him out, and my son slept through the whole thing. And so I grabbed him and I went outside, and I remember it raining. And the friend had called the police. And I remember hearing him call the police. I was getting it. And I think he said something like, it's an attempted homicide or something like that. So even then it didn't feel that way. I was like, well, that's a little strong. But I think I share that with you just so you know, kind of to paint the scene. So it was a very unexpected night because, like I said, we didn't really have fights like that, or that wasn't really my full experience of him. So then within that season, I'm still believing in God to be this big God, and God's going to get me through it. But, in 24 hours, he moved out. He was from a different state, so moved back to that state. So I was kind of experiencing a divorce. Yeah. Not from the outside that people might have said that, because I think there's a lot of stigma when you're a young couple like that, a young mom. Mm-hmm. But we lived together. We shared our money. We shared our responsibilities, and just kind of experienced a divorce. And at the same time in that season, a few weeks later, I was talking with him, and I found out that my mom had actually been in a homosexual relationship the whole time I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And I think in that moment, I felt like the carpet was kind of just ripped out from under me. Yeah. So it wasn't finding out that my mom was in a homosexual relationship. It was more finding out that I didn't see it. Mm-hmm. And so up until that season of my life, which feels so odd to say, but I didn't feel like my family was very abnormal. I remember going to some church, or I remember hearing people's testimonies, because again, my mom had talked about God doing great things in people's lives. And I remember thinking, gosh, I have a pretty good life. I don't know what my testimony would be, So it felt like, I would say I do this a lot now, but when you doze off during a movie, in and out of a movie, and then you're like, oh crap, I need to rewind and see what the story was. That is exactly what it was. And I was like, I can't believe I missed all of this. I had no idea my mom there. So
oh my gosh, Connie.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm just so sorry that you had to walk through this trauma. And when you said it like that, of rewinding and then seeing, because as a child, just even as a 5-year-old, and recognizing this isn't your dad. I think the word you used this summer is that you were lied to multiple times over and over, where you assume this is my reality, and it isn't. How did you walk through that shifting process of understanding, okay, this is what I thought happened, this is what actually happened, and just reckoning with the weight of not only your mom, but just what was happening with your entire family?
It was very difficult, and it was not a overnight process. So I always like to make that clear to people. I think my faith, even though my lifestyle might have not shared it, I had this deep belief in God. So I felt so shattered about that. My faith, my belief in God was really at risk here, because I have other family members that are complete non-believers, or even could say atheists, So I'm wow, I look ridiculous. I feel humiliated that I'm putting all this weight even on my mom's faith, that maybe her life didn't line up exactly. So it took a lot of meeting with people, replaying parts of my life to try to bring reality into perspective, because that's really what I had not seen reality at all. Yeah. And so the one thing I think that was helpful is I had a family system during the week, which was my mom, who professed Jesus. And I do think she has a love for Jesus now. And I think some of it was misaligned, but I think she was professing Jesus, and yet she was still very messy. And then I had family that I would visit on the weekends, because remember, I visited my birth dad on the weekend and then my stepdad on another weekend. So they didn't profess Jesus, but they were consumed by their own messiness as well. So there was a mix of good and bad there. And then I would have family, this extended family on the holidays, and maybe a different side of the family. And I was well, some of them have different beliefs. in faith and some of them don't believe at all. And they're kind of messy. Yeah. So for me at that point, I was like, the common denominator here is not Jesus. The common denominator is sin and our own humanity and our own lack of boundary. There was just like all this. So it kind of drove me to just go on my knees and ask God to show up in a big way. And I really was obsessed with Proverbs and any wisdom verse because I felt like I'm going to need it because I missed half of my life here. And I think I just drove towards that. So I was really unapologetic about showing up for as much as I could to learn about who God was and to really understand the Bibles. I remember my mom a long time ago had given me like a King James Version Bible, which at the time, I don't know what that means, So I remember having this and it was like gold on the outside, like real gold. I remember her telling me it was like 14 karat gold. I'm like, great. Ooh. So, I start reading this Bible and I'm like, a lot of this is weird. Why are there animal sacrifices? And where should I start reading? And it was very overwhelming. And I got very frustrated with people who would just say, just go pray or just go read your Bible and God will show up. And I'm like, I need to engage my brain here. Because like a childlike faith actually felt very dangerous to me. Like it did not feel safe to just do that. So I became relentless about showing up while navigating some stigmas of just being a single mom. So, I would show up, I would feel very much like an outsider in churches. And even now, sometimes I do, and I do silly things because I get a little anxious, even though I've worked in ministry before, outside of ministry, I've spoken to churches. There are still some times where I get a little like I'm on the outside. But
Connie, you used the words that you were a professional chameleon, and you had said like you had been a pretty good kid, you were faithful, but sometimes like things happen. Like people, I just talked to our daughter about this, where she's 14, freshman in high school, and sin abounds, people's mistake abounds. And like, how do you adjust? How do you recognize that? How do you love people where they are? And so I'd love for you to talk about when people feel like they're a professional chameleon. Usually it's obviously because of childhood trauma or something that they've learned where like, we just need to assess the situation and I will be whatever I need to be for that. Tell me if that shows up still now, that there's a little bit of chameleon that like you have to fight back.
I would say I'm very good at catching myself. If I am starting to kind of want to bend in a way that is going to please people. Yeah. However, I do think now, like years later after all of that, and it's doing some counseling work, I think I've become like a very big boundary person because of the work I've done, but also because of that. Some of it can turn into unhealth because it can be very self-protective of like, no, I'm not going to do something, or maybe I'll make a inner vow of like, I won't do this because I'm being a little more self-protective. But I also feel like that serves me well in like making sure I'm not chameleon into what other people expect of me or other people's belief systems without actually engaging my own thought or wisdom that God gives me. So I can catch myself pretty quickly if I'm doing that. But I think I've swung the pendulum sometimes where I have a harder like boundary line than maybe I would have in the past. So Connie, when somebody is walking through a really tumultuous time in their life, whether that's with family, friends, just like their personal mental health, maybe just recognizing like there's a lot of trauma that I have gone through in my life. What would be some of your encouragement for them to be able to really understand the narrative of God, to say, you know what, I don't have to be scared of a childlike faith. Like, how is that process for you of like getting out of that and really finding the narrative for yourself? I think for me, it was one, being okay with being human. And so sometimes you are going to have a narrative about what church world is like, what Christians are like. And I think you need to understand that, when you're trying to cultivate a faith and heal from things, that you're going to be bringing a lot of your humanness into realms where you think that maybe you don't trust the people on the other side or the narratives you've heard about Jesus or people who follow Jesus. And I think I would encourage you to don't let those narratives lead the way. I would say make your own decision by trying to learn about Jesus for yourself and also seeking out community and counseling to help you do that. I know like after going through all of that, I was like, I'm not going to let somebody choose my faith for me. I want to experience Jesus for myself. Yeah. And I wanted to have a very deep rooted faith. And I felt like too, as I started to learn, Jesus really illuminated how beautiful his story was. And I remember reading and like learning about the context of the Bible and learning about the culture of that time and how the story really illuminated. And I remember thinking, why didn't they teach this? Why isn't the depth of this story taught in such a manner? So, you know, I think as you forge forward in forming your own faith with Jesus, he's going to illuminate things that will pierce your heart in ways that you can't imagine. And I think that is for people who come from a traumatic past or just people who come from a past where Jesus was not really talked about.
Yeah, that's so good, Connie. The beautiful thing of the story of Jesus and the overarching theme of the Bible, the narrative is it is a love story and it is redeeming. It is gracious. And so I know that your story doesn't end with you trying to figure out your faith. So would you tell us a little bit about just the ways that you've seen God's faithfulness, how he has redeemed you and your son's life from that moment after?
After I started chasing after Jesus and, navigating some, awkward church culture encounters and feeling like an outsider and navigating being a single mom and some of the stigmas that go with that. Afterwards, I remember I went on a trip to Thailand, and one of the things I had kind of thought when I got pregnant, like I really didn't tell anyone. I kept it a secret for 5 months. I remember being somebody who really wanted to travel a lot. And I remember thinking I'm never probably going to travel. That was the least of my worries at that time. But I just remember that being a thought that snuck up, and I got to go on a trip to Thailand to work with sex trafficking. And I got to get baptized a few years later. I never really was chasing after like getting married. Honestly, I was kind of like just allowing God, like I feel like God was stabilizing some of my circumstances and allowing me to experience just this peace and joy in learning about him and being able to share with others about him. So that was like really fun. And I was really happy being single, and I think God was letting me experience all that. And I was really nervous about any other type of relationship. So, fast forward, I did end up like getting plugged into church, and I was seeing a counselor. And one of the things that was pretty redeeming is I had been praying like after that traumatic breakup, and that one night I was like, I'm not going to live here. I can't afford it. And so I remember putting in an envelope a prayer of like exactly how much rent I could spend and all of that, and sealing it, and a friend prayed for it. And fast forward, my sister had somebody come into her work and say that he had a daughter looking for a roommate and like a housemate, and it was the exact rent I needed. And it was just this really cool thing. And she had a Mennonite background. And so in my head, I was like, I don't know, how this is going to work out. Am I going to be out with a glass of wine at night? I just didn't know, but she was lovely. I ended up moving in, and there was a pamphlet from the church I had been attending, which was a larger church. And so we had never crossed paths, but she ended up happening to go to that church. So I ended up just meeting a lot of people my age that were following Jesus. And through that, I did meet my husband, who was on staff at the church, which was a very funny story because he did grow up very much in more of a church culture background. So we had a good time with that. So I didn't think I would get married, and he was a worship pastor at the time, and we ended up having a really fun dating experience, getting married. And he's been a great father to my oldest son, who's now in college. And then we have another one who is 11. And one of the fun memories for me is when we were getting married, my oldest son had wanted a ring. And so I got a ring, of course, and had vows to me, but my husband gave vows to my son. And it was so beautiful. And it was just really special.
That is special. Oh, you mentioned this summer that your husband, he loves to go to the Hershey amusement park. Like that's his jam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just beautiful to see how, like, you know, God redeems, how family looks different. It can change, it can grow. And I'm so grateful that you shared this story with us today, Connie. And there's so much more. She's fantastic. So if you want to connect with Connie, if her story resonated with you, what's the best way that they can do that, Connie?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram, which is at Connie Lemois, or you can email me at connielemois@gmail.com. I'd love to connect.
Yeah, all of Connie's information will be in today's show notes. And I'm grateful for you, friend. I love you, and I appreciate you sharing your story today.
Thank you, Danielle.
So Connie and I continued to chat afterwards, and her husband actually gave her son a ring, and he made vows to him on their wedding day. Isn't that so beautiful? I love that story so much. To connect with Connie, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Connie. Number 1, Connie talked about the narrative. I'd love for you to navigate and understand your own personal narrative and how that can draw you closer to Jesus. Number 2, is there a space that you have become a professional chameleon? Maybe you are triggered by something in the past, or it is a habit you didn't know was there. I'd love for you to spend some time journaling and thinking about that thought. As always, the editing skills that go into the production of the Parable podcast are all my boo, my husband, Eric, and we love you. I know you could be spending your time doing so many things, so the fact that you took the time to spend it with me is greatly appreciated. Remember, your parable showcases how God doesn't want your secondhand faith. He wants you all for himself. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.